Welcome to Antarctica Did That For Me. We're a podcast for everyday people with a little adventure in their hearts. We're Keri and Cassa, and we've spent huge chunks of our time living and working in Antarctica. Welcome to a journey that changed our lives. We hope it will change yours too. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Antarctica Did That For Me. My name is Keri Nelson. I'm one of your co-hosts, and I'm sitting here with my very good friend, Cassa Grant.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Cassa. And today we are here to talk to you about mirages. We call them Fata Morgana in Antarctica. And we think that they are just sort of a poetic introduction to the idea of Antarctica not always being what we think it is. Sometimes it's just a little bit different. So I'm going to read a little thing here. There's a phenomenon that happens on the ice shelf near McMurdo Station. The place where ice meets land is obscured in funhouse shapes. What looks like a cliff from afar may not be. What looks like open water is still ice. These are Fata Morgana. They're basically mirages. And they're what lets you know that as well as you think you know Antarctica, you don't really know the continent's shape. Your senses are letting you down, and you don't really know anything at all. That is a passage that I'm actually writing a book about Antarctica, Cassa, and that's part of why this was on my mind, because I was just thinking about how the things that I thought Antarctica might be before I got down there weren't really exactly what I found when I got there. Did you have that feeling at all when you arrived at the ice?
Well, not when I arrived at the ice, but I did have some interesting perceptions when I first heard about people working down there. And that was what was really very different from what the reality was when I got down there. And I love that you're writing this book, Keri, and I'm so excited. This is our sneak peek. And I'm like, ooh, I want more of that. So this is fantastic. I love it. But I think you're right. It's this idea of projecting, but also sometimes our senses not being able to actually give us information that is factually correct. Again, I don't want to argue about truthiness or facts or things like that. But, what is real and what's an illusion, basically?
When I thought about going to the ice, I know you had some explanations from people who had worked there before you got there. But for me, it was this complete blank slate. And in my mind, when I was drawing, what would Antarctica look like? What would it be when I got down there? I had a picture of people being hardy team workers who work together to get a singular mission done. I thought of those people as being very independent people who wouldn't really need each other. I thought, that we would all just be always working towards the mission, all dressed up in our cold weather gear. And I don't know what else, huddling for warmth in the times that we weren't, and doing sciencey things all of the time. So if I'm giving an example of what it looked like from afar and what the reality was when I got to the ice, I would say what it looked like from afar was the hustle and bustle of science. Everybody always gathering data, everybody trying to help scientists is what I thought I would see. And when I got up close, I saw, yes, there's all sorts of research happening, but there's so much more to life in Antarctica. And all of the fun of the life of Antarctica was something that I just didn't see coming at all. So that was part of the mirage, how it looked different from afar.
For me, it was, I was living in Prague at the time, and this guy that I was dating was like, people work down there. And I was just like, oh, why would you do that? Like, don't they know about winter? Like, I just thought it was a bunch of people who didn't know about winter and were like, yeah, let's go to this really cold place. And I was picturing cold bunkers. I was thinking something very, it is fairly industrial actually with my experience at McMurdo anyway. But I was just picturing this very Spartan existence of, I'm not going to say eating the gruel or something like this, but it was it was definitely along those lines of just ugh. It just did not seem like a really fun or cool place to be when I first started hearing about it from him. And then later on, I had a friend who was a very close friend who wanted to go down, had applied for years. I had been witnessing him go through the application process for a couple of years. And then I was actually there when he was being interviewed and then deploying. And so I actually got to see from a pretty close up perspective what that part of it was like. And then I heard from him for years before I actually went down about what his experience was. So that's where it's hard for me to kind of separate those two, because I was hearing about his experience for about 5 years before I actually went down.
Was that the experience you had then? Was the experience that was described to you?
Well, it was closer than it sounds like yours was. He had basically described it to me as Burning Man on ice. and I had been to Burning Man many times. And so when I thought of Burning Man, I thought of working really hard. I thought of extreme conditions. I thought of a very creative community. I thought of challenges beyond what I had encountered in the past. So those are all, I mean, I think accurate still, actually.
I think you're right. Those are really accurate things. And yet I've been to Burning Man too. And there are many things that are very different about being at Burning Man than in Antarctica.
For me, it was like I didn't have a lot of expectations because I had kind of heard some of his stories. It definitely shaped my experience and my preparation for that experience.
Here's a way that it was different for me, that it just kind of seemed one way from afar. And then when I got to Antarctica, it was really not at all like that. Because the people of Antarctica have decided to leave whatever society they were in for a while and come down, you know, kind of shake out to a spot that's really different on the ice. In my mind, I was thinking all of us who kind of shook out of quote unquote normal society would come down to the ice and kind of be similar, that we would then be looking at the world in the same way, that maybe we're the ones who didn't belong in the other world, but now that we're all here, we're kind of all the same, and we have all these same goals of approaching what we want for our futures and what we're there for. And because I was there for sort of adventure and caring about Antarctica, my impression is that everybody was kind of looking at it from that space. And many people share that characteristic, but you run into people there who are just there for money. They're just there for a contract, or they didn't like any of their other jobs, so they just took this Antarctica job. They don't really care about being there, or they don't think about things long term. They think about things short term, or, you know, there's a lot of different ways of looking at Antarctica life. And my mirage was that we all were all kind of the same. But of course, Antarcticans are very different. It sounds stupid, but that was in some ways surprising to me and just different than what I thought.
I don't think that sounds stupid at all, though, because I think a lot of what is interesting to people about Antarctica is kind of that mystique, right? That's kind of what a lot of people consider to be exciting about Antarctica. And so we're kind of, you and I, when I say we're kind of in this echo chamber of people who are like, ooh, adventure, and let's do things and let's check stuff out. And not that these people wouldn't be either, but we were already kind of in that community of adventure. And so, yeah, I can see where it would definitely be that illusion as well. But as you said, the reality is we need people of all kinds down there. We need people who are going to be plumbers, and not that plumbers can't have adventure, but you know what I'm saying? Like there's just so much variety of exactly what needs to be done down there that people are going down because they're just like, yeah, why not? That's good money. I'll do it.
Yeah, it shouldn't have surprised me, but it did.
This also has happened to me in other situations with, you know, moving, changing jobs. We've talked about this a little bit before, but how a place is really going to shape us in unexpected ways or change our perception of a place or our experience, I think is really what was interesting to me about this. So for example, I lived in Prague for about a year when I was in my mid-20s. I was really freaked out, first of all, because it was like, oh my God, I'm moving to a foreign country. Like this is a big adventure. And it was a big adventure. And Czech is such a different language from any other language I had never really had any experience with Slavic languages before. And it was very scary. But I thought, oh, okay, I have to have a job lined up. I have to have a plan for when I get there, which is not really a bad thing. And actually that was kind of how I experienced Antarctica too, was like, I got to have all my vitamins. When I got to Prague, I actually went and I had signed up to be teaching English as a foreign language. I'd signed up to get my TEFL certificate and then be a teacher at this school. And they basically guaranteed you a contract if you passed their TEFL course, which was like 6 weeks, and it was very intense. And so I went through the course and it was great. I met a lot of great people. I learned a lot. I learned way more about English grammar, even as an English major, than I really ever wanted to know. And then I was like, this job is going to suck. I don't want to do this job. It was like, okay, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. you have classes, and then you had the middle of the day off, and then you had like 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. classes, and you were traveling around the city in the winter. And I was like, ugh. And so I decided, I was been a preschool teacher for years. My sister's an au pair in Germany. Maybe I could be an au pair here, which basically almost got me laughed off of basically every Czech person's radar, because they're like, why would you want to be an au pair in the Czech Republic? Which is hilarious. And there was only one family advertising at the time, and I got it, and it was amazing. And it was so much fun. And it was way better experience for me. But at the time, I just didn't know, like, you can just show up and figure it out. It'll take a little bit, and it'll take a little bit of creativity. But when I was thinking about going to Prague, and the illusion that I had to have everything figured out in order to feel comfortable enough to go there was absolutely the Fata Morgana in that experience. Because then when I got there, I was like, oh, no, I can do this instead. And it was a way better fit.
Well, here's another one, especially when I was at McMurdo Station. From afar, before I got to McMurdo, my thought was we're going down to a science base and I'm going to have contact with people doing science. I'm going to have friends who are scientists. I'm going to hear about the latest research. It's going to be something I might not be doing the research day to day, but I'm definitely going to see the results of it. And it's going to feel like a really sciencey place. And at McMurdo Station, the department that I was in and the jobs that I was doing, I hardly had any contact with people doing science. That wasn't true at the South Pole and at Palmer Station. You have a little more contact as a worker with people actually doing research. But at McMurdo Station, it's just so big and the departments are so huge. People doing the science work are kind of working in certain sections of the station that if you aren't involved in those parts of business, you might not know very many scientists at all. So that was just definitely something that I thought would be different. You're right. It was a Fata Morgana of my expectation of my life in Antarctica at McMurdo Station.
I think you're right. I think that probably was one for me too. I did probably I thought I'd go to, actually, maybe this is part of it. We have science talks every week, and I thought I would go to more of them.
Right.
And I would be more up to date on everything that was happening down there. And honestly, that did not happen very often. I went to science talks, but very selectively. And I actually was not as well versed on the science down there as I thought I would be.
Yeah, you think that's going to be your life, but there's a lot more going on, especially at the really big station, that your life can be all sorts of things but science, actually, maybe even the entire time you're down there.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes the other thing was for me is that I wouldn't say it was like imposter syndrome or anything like, or not having the background to be able to understand the science, but there were certain ones where I'm just like, I have absolutely no clue of the neighborhood that these people are in terms of what they're studying. And so it just felt like way too much for me to even get involved. Does that make sense? Like certain ones,
like you'd lost the thread before the conversation even started.
Yeah, I just didn't even have the frame of context to even really understand where the beginning point was. So then any of the talks just felt like, oh God, that's way, not that I'm like, oh, I'm a big dummy. It's just like, I just did not have that frame of reference. Whereas like things like anything with GIS, like that was my master's, was in geography. And so things like that I was definitely into, and I felt like I could understand well enough to really actually engage with it. Whereas other ones I'm just like, could not even connect because I didn't have that frame of reference.
No, it takes some expertise to talk about some of those things right from the beginning, for sure. Were there other things that you noticed that just kind of seemed different to you until you got there?
Something that you had shared, but I agree with, is thinking that since it was a large government program, there would be a lot of steadiness in moving towards the mission. And not that they're not, but whenever you're in a big government organization like that, there's going to be hiccups and setbacks and a lot of versatility and volatility with funding, with planning, with vision, emission changing, all kinds of things that happen. And I did think that, oh, well, this is a national governmental agency. Like things are going to be pretty stable. And to a certain degree, some of it is. Some of it, especially compared to other programs, like actually the USAP is very stable. But there are other parts that are absolutely not. And that was my first experience working with an organization of that size. And so, yeah, I definitely had assumptions and illusions about what that would look like. And I think you had mentioned that you did too.
Yeah, I mean, that there would be more of a clear driver of the bus on all of the levels, I guess. And in fact, there's a lot of different agencies working together to try to make the Antarctic program happen year to year. And there's a lot of different motivations. There's a lot of different leadership structures. And so it isn't as smooth of a forward movement than I just anticipated looking at it from the outside. There's a lot of good reasons why that has to be the case, right? I'm not saying that is a bad thing, but I just thought it would move more in step with each other than it seems to sometimes.
Yes, you put that way better than I did. But I agree. That was definitely something that I had as an expectation or as an idea.
I think one thing that I didn't expect, because of the large amount of people at McMurdo Station, we're talking sometimes more than 1,000 people in the summer. You definitely cannot know and be fast friends with 1,000 people all at once. But I didn't expect the separation between how the department that you could work for could become, in a lot of ways, an enormous part of your social life in Antarctica too. So I guess I was not expecting people to be so identity aligned with the job that they had. Because, for example, the galley has maybe 40, 50 or more people working in it. That's bigger than the entirety of Palmer Station itself. So it makes sense why that would be, but it was a surprise to me.
That's an interesting one.
Like the waste people might have all friends who are part of the waste department. Like the fuels folks might have all friends who are part part of the fuels department because they're enormous departments. And so that's the space you have for social life.
Yeah. And actually, I was really glad that I was actually there the last year that we deployed in this way, which is we used to meet up in Denver for a couple of days before we flew down to Christchurch. And the people that I met during that training and that deployment as a new person were people that I was friends with, and they were from all kinds of different departments. And so I was really lucky to be able to have those connections early on with people who actually weren't in my department, because I could see later on, yeah, if you were just deploying straight down to the ice, that's really all you were being exposed to on a day-to-day basis, functionally speaking. And so it totally made sense that people were kind of getting more insular in those ways, because that's where a majority of their time was. And it can be challenging to walk into the galley and go, oh, where should I sit? I want to sit with people I know. But if you know more people, or if you've been at least exposed to a few more people from the get-go, it can really help with that. And you're right, I didn't expect that either.
I guess our point today is really not everything is what it seems. And those Fata Morgana, those mirages in polar regions and other parts of the world too, are sort of a good reminder. But when things don't meet your expectations, keeping an open mind can help us find worlds that might be even better than what we could have imagined in the first place. And so I think that philosophy goes into what our call to action is for this week. So Cassa, do you want to talk about what we're going to ask people to do this week?
Yeah, it's basically thinking about, is there anything in your life that you thought would be one way, but it turned out to be not like what you thought it would be at all, and you still really enjoyed it? I mean, my example of Prague is a great one for this. So we just want you to kind of search your mind for a couple of those kinds of things and reflect on how were those things different than what you expected, and is there any way that your experience was enhanced for what you didn't really anticipate? Just reminding yourself that sometimes we actually don't get exactly what we expect. Actually, most of the time, let's be honest. But we often get something a lot more nuanced and a lot of times even better.
Yeah, I think that's good food for thought for this week's episode. And we really appreciate everybody tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks. See you then.
Thanks for listening to the Antarctica Did That For Me podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support our efforts, we would love it if you would tell your friends. And if you leave us a review on Spotify or Apple, it will help us find more of our fellow adventurers. We release a new episode every Tuesday, and we are a video and audio podcast, so you can watch or just listen. We're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and more, or find everything, including links to our social media, at our website, antarcticadidthatforme.com. Thanks again for listening, and until next week, keep thinking about what opening your own heart to adventure could do for you.